I feel like I've already made this video twice this year, but the Chicago Bulls are the most frustrating team in basketball to me, I think. Just in terms of continued insistence upon mediocrity is basically what frustrates me the most about this Bulls team, because at the end of the day, this is a team in the third largest market in the NBA with an absolutely storied history, winning 6 titles in the 90s with Michael Jordan. They really haven't been consistently relevant since MJ retired, I guess, after the 98 championship. And we're going on almost 30 years at this point without consistent relevancy for the Bulls. They had some good moments, obviously, in the Derrick Rose era and things of that nature, but over the past few years, this team has just gone nowhere. They feel like they're stuck in mud, and even this trade deadline, they trade Zach LaVine, but don't commit to a full-scale rebuild. Don't trade a bunch of the other guys in their roster that could have been real useful assets to build towards the long term, and just feel completely stuck on the bottom side of the middle. And being stuck in the middle in general really isn't where you want to be in the NBA. That's what I call basketball purgatory, which is when you're not good enough to compete, but you're not bad enough to get a super high draft pick. But not only that, they're on the bottom half of that. They're not even good enough to compete, but they don't look to have a path towards contention in the future because they're not going to likely get a high draft pick. They don't have a bunch of other assets, and they refuse to use the assets they do have to build up assets for the future, and have basically accepted total mediocrity. Like, their GM literally came out after the deadline and basically said that making the play-in would be a win. In what world would making the play-in be a win in a super weak Eastern Conference where you're just going to get blasted in the play-in anyway and not make the playoffs? I mean, they re-signed Lonzo Ball to a 2-year, $20 million extension at the deadline, which is a unique trade to say the least. They trade Zach LaVine, who I actually really liked, was having a great year and thought had a little bit more trade value, and trade him basically to get their own first-round pick from this year back, which was top 10 protected. So now they get to guarantee themselves their first-round pick. And then they get Zach Collins, Trey Jones. Who was the other guy they got in that trade? Kevin Huerter. So 3 guys who aren't really, I don't think, key rotation pieces at all. This is a team that doesn't feel like they have a lot of hope. Like, maybe Buzelis continues to develop. He's had a couple really good games recently. He had like a 10 for 10 earlier this week that was really, really good. And I mean, they have some young talent, but they're also super redundant at the guard positions. Javon Carter, Ayo Dosunmu, Josh Giddey, I guess Talon Horton-Tucker, if you consider him that. Trey Jones, I mean, even Kevin Huerter, Kobe White, like, just so many different unnecessary guards on this team. They got 5 point guards. Like, I just don't understand the plan. They have way too many point guards. They could have used multiple of these guys to get actual assets for the future, not to mention Patrick Williams. That's a tradable asset to get you stuff in the future. Vucevic, how in the world is he still on the roster? He does nothing but help you win more games, which really shouldn't be the goal for a team that, again, has no real path to anything more than losing in likely embarrassing fashion in the play-in. Like, this is not a team that is scary at all for anybody to play. They have one high-level NBA player, and that is Nikola Vucevic. Like, I think they got a couple of the guys on the roster that can become that. And I guess that's kind of the hope, is that a guy like Buzelis really reaches his maximum potential and things of that nature. But I don't see a path to this team to doing anything good. Like, they're the 10 seed right now. They're a game and a half above the Sixers, who are a complete disaster in their own right. And then every other team below them is pretty much tanking. Brooklyn, Toronto, Charlotte, Washington. Although Toronto did make a couple moves to get slightly better for the future, Brandon Ingram likely will not play at all or very little for the rest of the season. So they're still going to be pretty bad as well. So as a whole, it's like, they might make the play-in just out of the incompetence of the bottom of the East at the end of the day. But the Hawks are bad, the Sixers are bad, but the 8 teams above them are all far more competent. Even with the Magic's consistent offensive struggles as of late, I think as they find their groove again, they're going to be better. I know they've been bad, but this is not a team that has a path to really making the playoffs. And even if by some miracle they were to make their way out of the play-in and get the 8 seed, they're going to get mollywopped by the Cavs or the Celtics in the first round. I mean, they would get annihilated. That would be one of the most lopsided series that we've seen in a long time. So there's no path towards doing anything good. And it's a team that just clearly is not very good, even with Zach LaVine, who was arguably their best player, certainly one of their best 2. And now, I mean, without him, in the first place, they were already terrible defensively. Bottom 5 defensive team in basketball with a 1.15.7 defensive rating, but offensive rating, which has been around league average at 17th, is going to drop because you're losing your primary scoring ball handler in Zach LaVine. And it's going to be very much up to guys like Kobe White and Matas Buzelis, and hopefully Josh Giddey can develop some, and maybe Lonzo can become a little bit more of a scorer, and Vucevic obviously maintain that high load. Like, those are going to be the guys who have to score the ball for this team to be competitive. but they lose their best scorer and don't replace him with real valuable pieces. Like I don't see a path towards this team getting better. And when you look at their draft picks, the honest truth is they don't have any extra stuff because they get Portland's draft pick this year if it's not in the lottery, but it's going to be in the lottery. So they're not going to get that pick. They don't have any other draft assets whatsoever that are not their own, except for a 2025 second from Sacramento, but they're also giving up their second round pick the next 3 years. And I don't know what the protections are on that Portland trade for like how it works if they doesn't convey this year. I'm sure that'll convey as second round picks or a first round pick in a later year or something along those lines. But either way, they don't have a gluttony of assets by any means. They have basically what you would expect from their own assets and nothing else, which is not a great place to be for a team that is clearly bad and is clearly trying to get worse. And you look at the odds, and with currently the 8th worst record in basketball, they have about a 25% chance at getting a top 4 pick. Otherwise, they are probably going to end up with either the 8th or the 9th pick in the draft, potentially 10th as is. And look, the only team that I think they likely could get worse than real, in all honesty, that's in front of them is Philadelphia. Like you're looking at the 7th or 8th worst team in the league in all likelihood, which means you're looking at probably about a 25 to 30% chance that you get a top 4 pick. And otherwise, in all likelihood, you're going to end up with the 8th, 9th, 10th pick, which in a loaded draft might get you a good player, but still, it's just a really unfortunate, really frustrating situation, I feel like, for Bulls to be in, or Bulls fans to be in. And here's the honest truth, y'all. It would be frustrating in of itself to have this be the roster and this be the path forward for this team. But it's made even worse by the fact that they've been doing this for like 3 years. Ever since Lonzo got traded and that team that was the 1 seed in the East in like 2021 basically fell apart, the last 3 seasons have been nothing but just total mediocrity. And eventually enough has to be enough. You have to pick a direction. And it seemed like this trade deadline was going to be the point where they were going to pick a direction. They were going to trade Lonzo for a couple of second round picks. They were maybe going to look to move a Kobe White or a Josh Giddey or a Patrick Williams or somebody like that and try to get a first round pick. They were going to try to get a little bit more out of Zach LaVine than they did. They were going to try to move Nikola Vucevic. And instead they only wind up moving LaVine for an underwhelming return, and they re-signed Lonzo and do basically nothing else. And just, they didn't sit pat. They're going to be worse than they were, but they're not committing to a rebuild, and they seem fine with just winning 32 games or 36 games in a perfect world, and just being like, that's a failure in my mind, and that's a failure in the fans' minds. I totally know that. Bulls fans are pissed. It is interesting talking to Bulls fans on the timeline on Twitter and stuff. I got some friends who are Bulls fans. They're pissed. They do not like this team. They do not like this front office, and they do not like the direction of this franchise. And I can't blame them, because there's no real direction that I can tell. It's like we're just cool being mediocre to bad. And that's a shame. That's not the place you want to be as a franchise, especially a franchise with the storied history and massive market that the Chicago Bulls have. So maybe things get turned around, but as of right now, I'm just not seeing a realistic path towards change in the near future. And that's got to be a shame now that we're going on year 3, really getting close to year 4 of this mediocrity. And I don't know what the plan is, and I don't know if the front office knows what the plan is, to be totally honest. So I hope y'all did enjoy the video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button and leave a comment and subscribe. I'll be back with more NBA content very, very soon, and I appreciate y'all. Peace.